Welcome back. In this lesson, I will share with you the building blocks of French society. I'll share what I believe are the core facts about the French people. First, I'll try and tell you where the French people come from, explain that there is no French ethnicity, and explain that France is the real melting pot. Then I'll give you an overview of the structure of French society today: numbers, age groups, density, revenues. And finally, I will try and explain immigration, its relative importance, its historical significance, and its reality today, mostly in contrast with what some populists or 24-hour TV would want you to believe. A pretty solid cliche I keep hearing about France is that all French are descended from the Gauls. All French people have heard about the concept of nos ancêtres les Gaulois. That cliché has been reinforced by the cartoonist Albert Uderzo and his famous Astérix character. In 2006, Nicolas Sarkozy, then running for president, himself was a Hungarian-born father, said that as soon as you become French, your ancestors are Gauls. Well, that's simply not true. In 1987, François Mitterrand, an earlier president, during a seminar about the concept of nation, ironically explained that we're French, a little Roman, a little Germanic, a little Jewish, a little Italian, a little Spanish, more and more Portuguese, perhaps, who knows, Polish. And I wonder if already we're not a little Arab. Well, that's more like it. Due in good part to its location, France is the very definition of a melting pot, more so than the USA, really. Roughly speaking, there were two big immigration waves in French history. The first one is the barbarians' invasions 2,000 years ago, and we'll discuss the second wave, which started after the start of the Industrial Revolution, a little further down this lesson. The first wave of the French melting pot started in earnest around 200 before Christ and lasted until the early Middle Ages. As the map shows, barbarian invasions describe the movements of Germanic people into the Western Roman Empire. Barbarian is a term coined by the Romans, who obviously weren't too happy that the territories were being invaded. But in the end, they lost, and the Roman Empire was indeed destroyed. Before any of this, there were the Greeks in the south, who founded Marseille around 600 BC. The famous Gauls themselves were a group of Celtic people of mainland Europe who arrived slowly from around 500 before Christ. The Romans started to settle in the south of France from 200 BC and moved north, with Julius Caesar defeating the Gauls in 57 before Christ to form the Western Roman Empire, stretching all the way into England. At the same time, the Germanic people were starting to invade from the east and the north, and they kept at it until the Roman Empire crumbled from around 480 CE. It appears that François Mitterrand was right. Let's see. First the Greeks, then the Gauls and the Romans, who became the Gallo-Romans, Roman-ruled Gauls, the Germanic people, including the Franks, hence the name France. Then, a little later, on the fringe of the main show, the Norse, also known as Vikings, who came to England and Normandy, les Bretons, who came from England too, and les Catalans and les Basques in the south. And then the second wave, thirdly from Europe, mainly Italians and Spaniards. And then people from the north of Africa, the Maghreb, Algerians, Moroccans, Tunisians. And then, more recently, Turks and Chinese, and even Pakistanis, just like in England. So, today, there are over 66 million of us French people in metropolitan France, and another 2.2 million in our overseas territories all across the world, as you can see on this map. Race and ethnicity are very touchy subjects in France. That's because since the French Revolution, the concept of race as some sort of meaningful biological distinction defining subgroups in the human species often comes with ideas about which subgroups are better, whatever that means, than others. So, France is officially colorblind. But we all know that reality isn't. Race statistics are not exactly illegal, but difficult to come by because France's census only collects information on individuals' nationality and country of birth. However, that's changing. In 2016, the French Special Council on Human Rights, called Le Défenseur des Droits, conducted a self-declarative survey. As you can see here, based on this survey, France is predominantly white. A lot of the self-described black population stems from the overseas territories because they are Afro-Europeans, and the relatively low number of self-described Arabs probably means that after a few generations, a good number aren't sure their race. Here you go. That's France for you. Not surprisingly, like in all OECD countries, France's population is aging, although not as quickly as in most other countries. This obviously will have a long-term impact on the French economy and is surely one of the reasons the government passed recently a very unpopular pension reform. Also to be mentioned, a relative stagnation of life expectancy between 2019 and 2022, which is mainly due to the COVID pandemic. And, like in most European countries, the growth rate of the population is or will be impacted by immigration. One reason France's population isn't aging as quickly as its neighbors is that France is Europe's baby champion, as you can see. Although recent stats are actually implying that this might not last. There were 678,000 newborns in 2023, down 7% from 22 and 20% from 2010. Again, maybe COVID is partly responsible. The government's accurately aware of the situation and is reigniting so-called family-friendly policies. So it's quite possible that the French birth rate will actually rebound as it did once back in the 1990s. France is a rich country, but French average revenue is, well, average, as you can see here, compared to other OECD countries. As you can see here, the average French person makes just over 30,000 euros a year, and taxes that people pay are fairly high. But that's to pay for a well-known welfare system, which guarantees that inequalities overall are fairly low in France. Over 57% of French citizens are net beneficiaries of the welfare state. In 2019, the richest households made just under 130,000 a year. Before redistribution, that's 18 times higher than the poorest households with 7,000. But after redistribution, the incomes of the wealthiest are 3 times higher, under 80,000, than those of the poorest, at 25,000. This system is a political choice and may not be for everybody. But to compare it, say, to the US system, you need to incorporate the significant cost deltas that healthcare and education have, for example. This might explain why the French Gini index is 68 when the US is 59. As we have seen earlier, over 75% of the French population is concentrated in 20% of the territory with some 20% of the people, that's about 12 million, in the Paris region, which is just 2% of the territory. Other regions, densely populated, are those of large valleys, seashores, and border areas, i.e. regions where there are large cities because obviously population density and urbanization are linked. Most say that COVID started a wave of people moving out of large cities. But that trend was there before. As you can see here, people are migrating south, plain and simple. Paris is still attractive, but the northern towns and regions, formerly industrial, are way less attractive. In 2021, the National Statistics Office says that just under 7 million people have moved. That's about 10% of the population. And it's about the same number as pre-COVID. 3 out of 10 movers have stayed in the same area, the same commune, but moves outside of the Île-de-France Paris region were up 25%. Now, let's talk about immigration. I'm very aware that this is a subject about which most foreigners require clarifications. So here we go. In 2021, almost 7 million people, or 10.3% of the population, were immigrants, meaning born outside of France. In comparison, in 1968, 6.5% of French residents hailed from abroad. In 2021, more than a third of those immigrants in France had acquired French citizenship. The largest groups are from the Maghreb countries, with Portugal a sizable number for historical reasons. As you can note, there are about 150,000 Britons who have chosen to live in France, and some of them adopt the citizenship, especially after Brexit, making France the second most popular European country for British nationals after Spain. And there are also over 100,000 Belgians. From the start of the Industrial Revolution, immigrants were coming into France from neighboring countries, Italy, Spain, Portugal. Then immigration from Africa exploded from 1962 until, well, fairly recently, around 2012. The Paris region is a magnet for immigrants, hosting one of the largest concentrations of immigrants in Europe. As of 2006, about 45% of people living in the region were either immigrants, 25%, or born to at least one immigrant parent, 20%. Fairly comparable to London, I guess. France has the longest history of immigration in Europe. In the 19th century, while the English, Irish, Germans, Scandinavians, and Italians left in droves to go to the New World, France was welcoming hundreds of thousands of Belgians, Germans, Italians, and Spaniards. The reason? Following the French Revolution and wars in the Empire, which led to a decline in fertility, read too many men killed, not enough kids, France lacked the manpower to industrialize. From the 1950s, it was the same reason that caused France to invite people from its former colonies to work in its factories. And in all likelihood, the same will happen again in the future, whatever the populists say. Over 3 generations, the impact of immigration is at least as significant in France as it is in the United States. In 1930, France had the highest rate of foreigners in the world, and in 1975, the proportion of foreign-born residents was more than 12%, compared with less than 5% at the same time on the other side of the Atlantic. As a side note, this picture you see here is not a fake. There is indeed a smaller Lady Liberty in Paris. The original one was designed by French sculptor Frédéric Bartholdi and built with help from Gustave Eiffel for the steel framework, and then gifted over to the United States in 1886. The original one's 93 meters high, the replica you see here is only 11 and something meter high and is the largest of the 7 other replicas found in Paris. But that impact of immigration is less significant in France now. Despite what nationalist politicians claim, there is less immigration into France than in comparable countries. Let's put things in perspective and consider a few metrics. Just over 10% of the French population was born in another country. That's above the 10% psychological mark, granted, but way less than in the USA or in the United Kingdom at almost 15%. The number of new residents is also lower in France than in comparable immigration countries. And, very important, net immigration figures, net meaning the number of people coming less the number of people leaving, in France is 10% of the UK equivalent, 72,000 in France versus 745,000 in the UK. You have probably read about or watched clips on 24-hour TV about France's purported failure at integrating immigrants. Well, that concept doesn't really resist a thorough analysis. True, integrating newcomers has always been a challenge. But, for example, on average, kids with foreign-born parents are as well educated as the rest of the population, despite their parents having problems, which were actually real. At the same time, there is no denying that life in some ghettos, we might as well use the name, is difficult, particularly for single mothers in cultural context often influenced by Muslim traditions. They certainly could do with more efficient assistance from the state. Overall, the integration problem stems from the fact that France and its politicians over the last 30 years have refused to acknowledge the evolution of French society from an assimilation model, where newcomers quickly blend into the fabric of French society, to a more communitarism model, where some subgroups want to keep some of their cultural roots while functioning into the French society, which they can do easily now thanks to communication and the internet, and was pretty difficult in the 30s, for example. That's a chance, and that remains a challenge, but certainly not a failure.